Hello and welcome to the Sleepy Universe story. I'm glad you found your way here. Maybe it's been a long day, or maybe you're just the kind of person who likes to end the evening with something thoughtful, something slow, quiet, and curious. If you like drifting off to sleep while listening to science and hopefully learning a thing or TW, you're in the right place. Just lie back, breathe easily, and let your mind settle into a slower rhythm. Tonight's journey stays close to the ground, to leaves, roots, sunlight. And so, we're asking a question that sounds simple, even strange, but opens the door to something much deeper. We know plants grow, we know they react, but is that all? Is there something more? Is it possible that plants can think before we try to? Answer these questions. If these quiet explorations help you relax, fall asleep, or just bring a bit of calm to the end of your day, consider gently tapping the like button and subscribing. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. And if you feel like sharing, let me know where in the world you're listening from down in the comments, or what topics you'd be interested in learning about next. Now, let's begin. When we think of intelligence, we picture movement, a fox adjusting its hunt to the wind, dolphin solving a puzzle for fish. Even the smallest insect navigates by sight, smell, and memory. In the animal world, intelligence is action tied to decisions made in real time as the world shifts around you. But what kind of intelligence could exist in stillness? A plant is anchored in place from the moment it sprouts. It cannot flee a predator, chase a mate, or wander toward better light. And yet across millions of years, plants have conquered nearly every environment on Earth: deserts, swamps, mountaintops, salt flats, deep shade, forest canopy. They do this without a nervous system, without a brain, without anything we traditionally associate with thought. And yet they survive. They adapt, they make decisions, often in ways that mirror the kinds of trade-offs animals must make. This isn't a metaphor. It's a scientific puzzle, one that researchers are only just beginning to piece together. In fact, some scientists now believe we may have misunderstood plants entirely, that buried within their quiet biology is a kind of intelligence we've simply never learned how to see. Part of the challenge is that plant behavior unfolds at a pace we're not used to watching. Where an animal might respond in seconds, a plant can take hours, days, even weeks. But slowness doesn't mean passivity. It may just mean that we've been measuring the wrong kind of arc. Some plants can sense as many as 20 different environmental signals simultaneously: light, moisture, gravity, touch, chemical gradients, nutrient concentrations, even changes in the presence of herbie organisms. They don't just detect these inputs passively, they integrate them. They weigh them against one another and they act. When roots branch in the direction of a buried water source, they aren't just growing randomly, they're responding to a signal and ignoring others. When a leaf tilts just slightly to avoid the shadow of its neighbor, or when a seed delays germination until the surrounding chemicals suggest safer conditions, perhaps more than just a reflex. It's conditional, it's selective, it's based on context, and context is one of the hallmarks of intelligence. In recent years, plant scientists have begun using terms that once would have seemed unthinkable in decision, anticipation, even learning. These aren't metaphors. They describe observable, testable phenomena, behaviors that vary, not just with conditions, but with history. In some cases, plants appear to alter future responses based on past events, which means they may remember. Take the example of Mimosa pudica, the sensitive plant. When touched, its leaves rapidly fold inward, a defense thought to deter herbivores or prevent water loss. But in laboratory studies, when scientists repeatedly dropped water onto these leaves from a fixed height, the plant eventually stopped closing. It had learned that the stimulus was harmless. When a new stimulus was introduced, like shaking, the folding returned. This wasn't fatigue, It was selective. The most remarkable part, the response persisted for weeks, even after the plants had been moved to new environments. No nervous system, no neurons. Yet something in the plant had recorded the experience and altered its behavior accordingly. What other capacities might be hiding in leaf and root? That's what researchers around the world are now trying to uncover, not just how plants react, but how they process information. Because the more we look, the more it seems that plants are not just responsive, they are interpretive. They weigh inputs, they filter noise, and in some cases, they seem to model what comes next. Take the case of climbing bean plants. In one experiment, scientists exposed them to rotating light sources, lights that moved in a predictable pattern across a surface. At first, the plant grew slowly toward the current position of the light expected, but over time, something shifted. The plant began adjusting not to where the light was, but to where it would be. It changed direction just before the light moved, anticipating the next phase of its arc. This predictive growth suggests a form of expectation, not in the conscious sense we associate with animals, but something subtler, a model of repeated experience encoded in behavior. It's the plant equivalent of predicting the weather by remembering the patterns of yesterday. And while this may not be thinking in any traditional sense, it raises the possibility that plants track not just what is, but what might be. But that wasn't the only example. In another experiment, researchers exposed Arabidopsis thaliana, a small flowering plant often used in genetic studies, to cold stress at the same time each day. After just a few cycles, something remarkable happened. The plants began activating their cold response genes before the cold arrived, as if predicting it. This wasn't reflex, it was recall. The plants had remembered the rhythm of their environment, the timing of discomfort, and adjusted their internal chemistry in preparatory. No brain, no neurons, just gene expression, cellular signaling, and distributed memory. That simple distinction between reaction and prediction is at the heart of modern research into plant intelligence. It's one thing for a seedling to lean towards sunlight. That's phototropism, a mechanical response to light deeply studied and well understood. But it's another thing entirely for a place and to adjust its behavior based on a pattern that hasn't yet occurred. That's not just sensitivity, it borders on inference. And inference, even in its simplest form, is a cognitive act. It means holding on to past input, comparing it to current input, and using both to shape future response. That might sound familiar because it's how animals learn, not through brute reaction, but by building models of their world and updating them with new data. And remarkably, plants devoid of neurons, of sepses, of the electrochemical machinery we think intelligence requires, seem capable of something as similar. But if there's no brain, where is this happening? Where inside the soft tissue of a stem or leaf does this predictive capacity reside? To answer that, we have to change the way we think about cognition. In animals, thought is centralized. The brain processes input, issues commands, and stores memories in discrete mappable regions. But in plants, there is no such central command, no node where signals are gathered, sorted, and acted upon. Instead, their processing, if we can call it that, is distributed. Each cell is a participant across the plant body. Networks of cells exchange chemical and electrical signals. These signals aren't just local. They can travel from roots to leaves and back again, altering behavior across the whole organism. In some cases, a stimulus applied to one leaf causes changes in others, even if those parts are physically untouched. That kind of internal coordination is in many ways a prerequisite for decisioning. It suggests integration, not just sensing but evaluating, not just reacting but choosing. And in some cases, those choices seem to follow a kind of logic. Researchers have discovered that plants can weigh competing options and make trade-offs based on risk and reward. Consider Arabidopsis thaliana again. when exposed to salt in the soil, something that can damage roots and hinder water absorption. The plant doesn't always retreat or avoid growth entirely. Instead, it shifts its root development in a calculated way. If nutrients are high enough to outweigh the damage risk, the roots why continue expanding into salty zones. But if the reward is low, they hold back. This is not a simple reflex. It's a context-dependent response that varies with external conditions and internal needs. The plant appears to evaluate to integrate multiple forms of information and respond accordingly to make a kind of cost-benefit analysis, all without a single neuron. This leads to a provocative question. If a plant can weigh options and select a path forward, does that qualify as intelligence? Or do we simply lack better words for what it's doing? The deeper we look, the more the boundaries begin to blur. Prediction, memory, decision, and integration of competing signals. These are not just mechanical traits, they're hallmarks of something more. And while plants may never think like animals, the idea that they don't think at all is starting to feel increasingly outdated. But intelligence, if we're going to use that word, isn't just about sensing or making decisions. It's also about communication, about sharing information between parts of a system or even between separate organisms entirely. And in plants, communication is turning out to be far more widespread and more intricate than we ever imagined. Some of it happens underground, not through sound or sight, but through chemicals passed from root to root, through signaling molecules, microbial fungi, and hydraulic changes in the soil. A plant experiencing drought, for example, may signal its neighbors, who then begin closing their stomata in preparation for water stress even before they feel it themselves. This kind of anticipatory coordination is startling. It suggests that plants don't just manage their own internal states. They sometimes adjust their behavior based on information received from others. These underground interactions can span large distances. In forests, for example, microbial networks, the symbiotic relationships between fungi and plant roots can link entire communities of trees together. Researchers have documented resource sharing through these networks. Carbon passed from larger trees to smaller ones, or nutrients redistributed during periods of stress. In some cases, when a tree is injured or attacked, it sends chemical signals through the microbial web, prompting nearby trees to boost their own defenses, increasing production of protective compounds before the threat reaches them. It's a kind of early warning system, a botanical version of lookout, something's coming. But it's not just fungi or root, as top plants also release volatile organic compounds, airborne messages. When damaged by herbivores, these compounds can be detected by neighboring plants, which then increase their production of defensive chemicals like tannins or alkaloids. The plants are in effect eavesdropping on one another, listening for signs of trouble on the breeze. This kind of communication, chemical, electrical, even acoustic, challenges the long-held assumption that plants are isolated, self-contained organisms. Instead, they appear embedded in complex information networks. A tree doesn't just grow alone. It exists within a social system, one that responds, adapts, and sometimes cooperates. Some researchers have even begun exploring whether certain species show a kind of kin recognition, responding differently to relatives than to unrelated neighbors. In a series of experiments with sea rocket plants, for example, individuals grown beside close kin were less aggressive in root competition than those grown next to strangers. The plants allocated resources differently, favoring coexistence over conflict. This suggests not just awareness of one's environment, but a discriminating awareness, a capacity to assess, categorize, and respond based on identity. It's not memory in the traditional sense, but it points to a functional equivalent, a mechanism by which plants modify their behavior based on who's around them. and what they've experienced before. Of course, in animals, such selective behavior is often underpinned by neural mechanisms, cognitive maps, sensory integration centers, and decision hierarchies. But in plants, the tools are different. Signals travel more slowly. Communication happens molecule by molecule through vascular tissues and cell walls, and yet the outcome can still resemble choice. In some cases, these choices emerge not from individual plants, but from groups acting together, collective intelligence on a botanical scale. One of the most striking examples of this is the behavior of desert shrubs that synchronize flowering based on rainfall. It's not just one plant responding to water, but a population coordinating timing, ensuring that pollinators arrive when they're most needed. The signal is distributed, the behavior collective, and in the forest, this idea takes on even more complexity. Through OT grafts, overlapping canopies, and shared microbial networks, entire communities of plants appear to modulate their behavior based on shared information. It's not just cooperation, it's interdependence. The success of one tree may hinge on the health and choices of many others. These networks, often called the Wood Wide Web, are formed by underground fungi that link the roots of multiple plants. Through them, trees can exchange carbon, nitrogen, and signaling molecules. A shaded sapling might receive sugars from a sunlit neighbor. A pest-infested tree can send out chemical alerts prompting nearby plants to bolster their defenses in advance. This isn't random diffusion. It's targeted, responsive, and often reciprocal. Some species even appear to distinguish kin from strangers, preferentially sharing resources with genetically related individuals. Others alter their growth depending on who is nearby, extending roots aggressively toward competitors or softening growth near siblings. In these relationships, we begin to see another layer of what might be called awareness, not in the sense of subjective experience. We're not suggesting that a tree knows in the way we know, but it perceives. It distinguishes. It modifies its behavior not just for itself, but in relation to others. And it's not just fungi-mediated cooperation. Some plants are in tightly integrated partnerships with ants, offering nectar or shelter in exchange for protection. Others use volatile chemicals to eavesdrop on nearby species, listening in on stress signals or blooming cues to better time their own behavior. Even parasitic plants like cuscudo or daughter vine can sniff out preferred hosts by detecting chemical signatures before making physical contact. These examples don't fit easily into our animal eccentric models of cognition. There are no brains, no sepses, no faces or movement. But there is complexity, there is choice, there is information being gathered, interpreted, and used in ways that shape the plant's survival. And remarkably, some of this communication even crosses species boundaries in subtler, more mysterious ways. In certain conditions, injured plants release airborne cues that can trigger responses not only in nearby plants of the same species, but entirely different ones. A damaged tomato, for instance, might warn a nearby bean plant. The signal isn't linguistic, it's chemical, but it still conveys meaning. Danger is near. The implication is striking. Meaning can exist without language. Information can be shared without a nervous system. These signals don't travel through wires or thoughts. They move through molecules. Diffusion and the shared atmosphere of a living community. And yet the effect is similar. A message is sent. A message is received. Behavior changes as a result. And the language of plants is far more sophisticated than we once thought. Some species can tailor their chemical output depending on the kind of threat they're facing. If an insect chews on a leaf, the plant may release compounds that attract that insect's specific predator. But if a pathogen attacks instead, the chemical profile shifts, activating defenses more suited to infection. This isn't just a reaction, it's discrimination. The plant can tell what kind of attack it's under and modulate its response accordingly. That level of selectivity demands nuance. It requires some form of recognition, a way to pass incoming stimuli and determine their meaning and imply. At biology, that means decoding complex molecular cues through networks of receptors, signal cascades, and hormonal regulators. Each leaf, each root tube, each patch of bark is part of T system, a node in a distributed web of information that functions not unlike a diffuse brain. Some scientists have even begun to compare this system to rudimentary forms of computation, not in the digital sense. Of course, there are no bits, no binary, no processes. But computation at its core is the transformation of input into output according to a set of rules in plants. Those rules are biochemical, environmental cues like light, gravity, or herbivore saliva trigger precise chains of molecular reactions that ultimately alter the organism's behavior. And just as a computer can perform logic operations, if this, then that, so can a plant. Some responses only occur when multiple conditions are met. For instance, certain defense genes are activated not by light alone or stress alone, but by the combination of both. That's a form of conditional reasoning embedded not in circuitry, but in the very architecture of plant physiology. It's slow, it's chemical, but it's structured, logical, functional. What's more, these logic circuits are not fixed. Plants can reconfigure their responses based on past experiences. Stress primes certain pathways, making future response as faster or more intense. In this way, plants exhibit a kind of learning, not by changing behavior directly, but by changing the threshold at which behaviors are triggered. This ability to recalibrate sensitivity, to tune one's inner workings to better match the world outside, is yet another marker of intelligence in living systems. One of the most intriguing aspects of plant behavior is the way these responses scale. A single leaf might respond to a wound by producing defense compounds, but the same signal can travel cell to cell, tissue to tissue, triggering defenses in distant leaves that weren't directly harmed. This systemic signaling is often carried by electrical impulses or waves of calcium ions reminiscent of how neurons communicate in animals. But unlike neurons, plant cells are not specialized solely for signaling. They are also metabolic workhorses, absorbing light, managing water, and synthesizing chemicals. Their dual function adds complexity. Why to the system? A plant's internal network is both its communication grid and its engine for life. And still within this complexity, the signals move with purpose. Some signals move faster than others, as quickly as a few millimeters per second, and they follow distinct paths depending on the type of stress. Herbivory, for instance, triggers one pattern drought, another, it's not used, that the plant sends a message. It chooses how to send it, where to send it, and which form the message should take. That kind of specificity hints at something more than reflex. It hints at internal representation. Representation in cognitive science refers to the ability of a system to encode the state of the world, to hold a model of external reality within itself. When a plant differentiates between light quality, soil composition, or nearby competitors, and alters its growth based on those distinctions, it may be engaging in a form of representation, a biochemical map of what's out there, drawn not in thoughts, but in chemistry. This idea that plants build internal representations of the world is still controversial, but it's gaining traction, especially as we uncover more examples of sophisticated decisions. In one study, corn seedlings were grown near a mechanical fan that preceded a light source. Over time, the plants began to associate the fan with incoming light, bending toward the airflow even when the light was withheld. This kind of associative learning, forming a predictive link between two unrelated stimuli, is a foundational concept in animal psychology. It's the basis of Pavlov's dogs, and here it was in a plant. Skeptics have questioned whether these responses meet the threshold for learning. But from a behavioral standpoint, the criteria are clear. If an organism alters its future behavior based on the pairing of past experiences, it has learned something. And, in this case, the corn seedlings behaved in a way that suggested memory, anticipation, and associative processing, all without a nervous system. So, how does this work? The answer lies again in the language of cells. Plants regulate behavior through a complex network of hormone signals, electrical impulses, and gene expression changes. Each pathway is tuned to specific environmental inputs, light, pressure, temperature, nutrients, and can modify the plant's growth or chemical output accordingly. Over time, the plant's history becomes encoded in its physiology. This kind of encoding, storing environmental patterns in physical form, is one of the most fascinating aspects of plant behavior. It allows for what some researchers have called semantic memory, the idea that its body carries its experiences not in a centralized storehouse like a brain, but as a distributed history across its tissues. For example, repeated exposure to drought can cause some plants to preemptively adjust their stomatal behavior, those tiny openings on leaves that regulate gas exchange. Even when moisture returns, the altered stomatal pattern can persist as if the plant remembers the risk and hedges its bets. This is not just passive carryover. It's an active regulated shift, often involving epigenetic changes where gene expression is modified in response to stress, and those changes remain long after the stimulus is gone. In some cases, these adjustments can even be passed to the next generation. Seeds from stressed plants sometimes inherit altered profiles, a kind of biological foresight, where the offspring are pre-equipped to handle conditions their parents endured. It's not Lemurian evolution. It's not a DNA mutation. It's a subtler, more flexible mechanism. Transgenerational memory through chromatin modification, small RNA letters, and inherited hormonal states. This transgenerational transfer of experience has led some scientists to explore the idea that plants possess a form of environmental inheritance, not in the genetic sense of traits encoded by base pairs, but as a kind of ecological intelligence passed along through physiological imprinting. In essence, a plant's behavior is shaped not only by its genome and its immediate surroundings, but by the lived experiences of its ancestors. If a lineage has endured repeated cycles of drought, salinity, or pest pressure, its descendants may grow with a kind of baked-in sensitivity to those pressures, altering root depth, growth timing, or chemical defenses accordingly. These aren't guesses. They are inherited strategies crafted not by DNA alone but by history. Such inheritance complicates how we draw lines between instinct and learning. In animals, learned behavior is typically seen as an individual acquired through direct experience. But in plants, the borders blur. When information persists across generations without altering the genome, it challenges traditional evolutionary models and raises new questions about how intelligence might be defined in systems without eating consciousness. This also invites us to consider a different kind of intelligence, not as something housed in a single mind, but as something that emerges collectively, not just across cells, but across organisms. In forest ecosystems, for example, certain species of trees are connected below ground by vast microbial networks, symbiotic associations between plant roots and fungi. These networks are not just passive conduits for nutrients. They can transmit chemical signals between trees, alerting neighbors to drought, disease, or insect attack. In some experiments, when a tree is injured, say by a pest infestation, it releases warming compounds into the shared network. Nearby trees, even those of different species, respond by ramping up their own chemical defenses before being attacked. This kind of coordinated response, spanning dozens or even hundreds of individual organisms, is sometimes nicknamed the Wood Wide Web. But what's truly remarkable isn't just the communication, it's the selectivity. Studies suggest that trees may prioritize their kin or those they share mutual benefit with. In some cases, they even seem to allocate more carbon or nutrients to their own offspring than to unrelated neighbors. It's a subtle but striking sign that even in plants, cooperation and competition may be negotiated, not blindly, but with context-aware rules. Even the dynamics of this underground communication are more sophisticated than they first appear. Chemical messages sent through root and fungal networks don't just travel passively. They move along concentration gradients, are selectively absorbed or ignored by recipient cells, and in some cases seem to be modulated in strength depending on the sender's condition. A tree in distress might emit a stronger signal, prompting a more urgent response in its neighbors. In that sense, the volume of the message can be dialed up or down depending on the situation, and the receiving plants don't all respond the same way. Different species and even individuals of the same species may interpret the same chemical cue differently, increasing defenses, altering growth, or changing their root architecture in subtly distinct patterns. This suggests that the messages aren't universally hard-coded instructions, but open to interpretation, filtered through the physiology and prior experiences of each listener. This layered responsiveness adds another dimension to our understanding of plant intelligence. Interpretation is not just possible, it's variable, and this variability may serve an ecological purpose. In a mixed species forest, the same signal might trigger different protective behaviors in different plants. A volatile compound released by a damaged willow could cause a nearby alder to boost its tannin production while prompting a spruce to alter the timing of its bud opening. Each response is tuned not just to the message, but to the biology of the receiver and perhaps even the broader ecological context. Researchers have also discovered that some of these responses depend on past exposure. A plant that has previously encountered a particular threat may respond more quickly or strongly to the signal than one that hasn't. In effect, it has been primed. This phenomenon, known as induced resistance, means that plant defenses can operate on a kind of immunological memory, not just reacting to stimuli but storing and modifying those reactions over time. This brings us closer to a fascinating frontier, the idea that plant communication is not just functional but adaptive. It's not static, it evolves over time. Signaling systems can become more efficient, more specific, and more attuned to the dynamics of the local ecosystem. And if communication can adapt, then in a very real sense, plants are shaping the languages they speak. In some species, this refinement goes even deeper. Take sagebrush, for instance. When damaged by herbivores, these plants emit a complex blend of volatile chemicals. But what's remarkable is that the composition of those chemicals can vary depending on the identity of nearby plants. A sagebrush surrounded by kin releases a slightly different mix of compounds than one surrounded by strangers, suggesting not only kin recognition, but the potential for customized messages. Even more striking, the receiving plants, especially if they're genetically related, respond more strongly to those customized signals. It's a kind of dialect, not universal, but familial. Plants may be developing localized chemical languages tailored to their community, improving both the efficiency and relevance of their warnings. This raises an extraordinary possibility that plants, through evolution and ecological feedback, have developed systems of information exchange that are both context-sensitive and flexible. Systems that transmit not just raw data but meaning. The message changes with the sender, the receiver, and the history between them. But what does it mean to share meaning without a mind? In cooperative science, meaning is often linked to representation, to the idea that us-10 can encode something about the world and act on it. In humans and animals, This typically involves symbols, language, or neural patterns. But in plants, meaning resides in chemistry in the specific blend of terpenes, alkaloids, or phenol sent out into the air. These aren't just stress responses. They're actionable signals. A certain compound might tell nearby plants to thicken their cuticles. Another might trigger faster root growth. The message is in the molecule, and that molecule doesn't exist in isolation. It's read through receptors, proteins embedded in plant membranes that bind to specific compounds and set off cascades of internal responses. These cascades often involve hormones like jasmonic acid or salicylic acid, chemical messengers that relay the signal inward, tuning gene expression and altering physiology. The message is passed, received, interpreted, and remembered, all without a single thought. This kind of chemical literacy, the ability to sense, decode, and act upon volatile signals, is widespread. Corn, tobacco, tomato, acacia, sage, and dozens of other species have all demonstrated airborne communication. The air between plants is not empty. It's a medium for conversation, slow, silent, and molecular. And like any conversation, the context matters. The same molecule can have different effects depending on who receives it. A volatile cue from a damaged tomato plant might trigger defensive responses in another tomato, but a different species might ignore it entirely. In some cases, even the same species will respond differently, depending on past exposure. If a plant has already encountered a certain herbivore, it may become primed to react faster the next time, a form of chemical conditioning that sharpens the meaning of the signal with experience. This sensitivity isn't random. It's built into the architecture of the plant's signaling pathways, networks of receptors, enzymes, and transcription factors that interact like logic gates. Some pathways amplify each other, others inhibit. Some only activate when multiple cues are present, like a chemical signature plus a mechanical wound. In this way, plants don't just detect messages. They interpret them, they discriminate, they apply context, and remarkably, this interpretation can even extend to eavesdropping, the unsolicited monitoring of other species' signals. In one set of experiments, researchers found that sagebrush plants released warning volatiles after mechanical damage, and that nearby tobacco plants, relied different species, responded by boosting their own defenses. The tobacco wasn't the intended recipient, but it had learned to associate those cues with danger. It had learned to listen. Some plants take this even further, not just listening to others, but modifying their own signals based on their own in competitive environments. For instance, certain species emit volatile compounds that inhibit germination in nearby seeds. This isn't mere defense, it's a preemptive strategy. If resources are limited, preventing the success of neighbors becomes a form of ecological control. But intriguingly, this suppression can be fine-tuned. If the nearby seeds are close relatives, the chemical output may lessen, suggesting a form of kin-selective behavior, or that shapes not just growth, but community structure. This interplay of signal and response creates a dynamic field of chemical negotiation. Plants aren't locked in isolated monologues. They're part of a biochemical discourse, full of cues, counter-cues, alliances, and deterrents. In weedy pastures and dense forests alike, these interactions can influence which plants dominate, which cooperate, and which wither in the shade of more strategic neighbors. Even parasitic species have learned to exploit this chemical language. The daughter vine cuscuta doesn't photosynthesize. Must latch onto a host. But how does it choose? Studies show that daughter seedlings can detect volatile signatures from different potential hosts, bending towards some and avoiding others. Given a choice between tomato and wheat, for instance, dodo often moves toward the more nutritious tomato. It's not just growing blindly. It's choosing. It's selecting a target bus. On chemical information. A decision with consequences for survival. And even once attached, parasitic plants continue to monitor their hosts, adjusting their own metabolism, growth rate, and even reproductive timing based on the physiological status of the organism. They're all feeding from. If the host is struggling, the parasite may reduce its drain to avoid killing it. The host is thriving, it might increase uptake. It's a balancing act, a kind of economic behavior governed not by intent but by feedback and modulation. What makes these interactions even more striking is how many occur simultaneously. A single plant might be processing dozens of signals at once, assessing nutrient gradients, water availability, herbivore pressure, and the identity of nearby neighbors. These inputs don't exist in isolation. They're layered, overlapping, often conflicting, and yet the plant responds with apparent coherence. It doesn't collapse under the noise. IT filters. It prioritizes this capacity to integrate, to sift through complexity, and produce a coordinated response is part of what's led some researchers to argue for a broader definition of cognition. Not cognition as consciousness, not as internal experience, but as a system's ability to acquire, store, process, and use information to guide adaptive behavior. In this light, a plant's distributed chemical network with its capacity for anticipation, discrimination, memory, and even learning begins to look less like a passive structure and more like a quiet, leafy mind. If we accept this broader framework that intelligence can emerge from the dynamics of a system rather than being confined to brains, then the plant world becomes not just fascinating but philosophically challenging. It forces us to revisit long-held assumptions about what it means to know, to perceive, to act with purpose, and it invites new questions about where the boundaries of cognition truly lie. For instance, some recent studies have shown that plants can exhibit forms of electrical habituation when repeatedly exposed to non-harmful stimuli like mild vibrations or light touches. The amplitude of their electrical responses diminishes over time. They stop reacting as strongly. This kind of neural-like attenuation is considered a primitive form of learning in animals. In plants, it's governed by calcium signaling, ion channel activity, and shifts in membrane potential. And crucially, it's not just fatigue. When a new stimulus is introduced, the electrical response returns, indicating selectivity, not exhaustion. Other researchers have begun exploring how plants might listen for sounds. In controlled experiments, roots have been shown to grow toward the source of specific acoustic vibrations, such as the gurgling of water in a pipe. The idea that a plant can detect and respond to sound even without ears or a nervous system is startling. But the data suggest real sensitivity to pressure. Waves, tiny mechanoreceptors in the root cells appear to transduce vibrations into electrochemical signals, allowing the plant to use sound as yet another cue in its growing environment. And sound is only one frontier. Plants are also responsive to electromagnetic signals in ways we are only beginning to grasp. Some studies suggest that plants can detect weak magnetic fields, such as those generated by Earth's geomagnetic field, and subtly alter their growth direction or cellular processes in response. The mechanisms are still debated, but hypotheses include magnetically sensitive proteins like cryptochromes, which are known to mediate like responses, and might also serve as a biological compass. If this turns out to be true, it would mean that plants navigate not only through soil and light, but through invisible fields of force that span the planet. This multimodal sensitivity to light, gravity, water, chemicals, sound, and perhaps magnetism gives plants an extraordinary situational awareness. But what's more remarkable is how they integrate these inputs. Plants don't just respond to one signal at a time. They synthesize. Then they prioritize. If water is scarce but light is abundant, they may favor root over leaf growth. If temperature and light signal opposing cues, the plant makes a choice. These aren't automatic pre-programmed responses. They are weighted, conditional behaviors, The plant is weighing variables, choosing among strategies, and altering its internal state accordingly. Some of this coordination lies on plant hormones, chemical messengers, like toxin, gibberellin, cytokinin, abscisic acid, and ethylene. Each has multiple effects depending on concentration, location, and context. Auxin, for example, promotes cell elongation in stems, but inhibits growth in roots. It flows directionally through tissues, creating gradients that shape how a plant bends branches and even forms new organs. In this way, hormonal signaling in plants operates not unlike neurotransmission in animals, except slower and without sepsis. Signals diffuse across space, are picked up by receptors, and trigger cascades of genetic and biochemical changes. Some researchers now believe that this collective responsiveness, these massive webs of shared chemical cues and resource flow, may represent more than just a communication network. It may constitute a form of distributed intelligence, not a brain, not even a mind, but a system that together holds and acts upon information, at the environment in ways that no individual plant could on its own. This idea isn't just philosophical, it's testable. When parts of these networks are disrupted, for instance, when the microbial fungi are removed, the ability of plants to anticipate stress, coordinate flowering, or share nutrients declines. The network itself appears to be a functional unit. Damage the system, and the intelligence fades. This challenges our idea of what it means to be an individual. In the plant world, identity is more porous. Boundaries blur. A tree is not just a tree. It's a node in a living web shaped by and shaping the behavior of others. Its memories may be carried in hormones, in root tips, in fungi. Its choices are influenced by neighbors. Its resilience is communal, and if that sounds strange, consider this. In our own brains, individual neurons are not conscious. A single synapse knows nothing, but together, through trillions of connections, they give rise to thought. Something similar may be happening in the forest. Each plant, each fungal thread is just one part, but together they form a dynamic system. Sensing, reacting, adapting. This doesn't mean that forests think in the way we do. There is no central awareness, no single stream of consciousness, but there is information being processed. There is integration of experience. There is learning, sometimes across entire communities. And the mechanisms behind it are not magical. They're biochemical, ecological, and testable. As scientists continue probing these relationships, a new vision of intelligence begins to emerge, one that isn't limited to neurons or to movement or even to individuals. A kind of intelligence that is quiet, slow, deeply rooted, one that flows through sap and wrath, or then thought and speech, one that we are only just beginning to see. This broader view of cognition as something distributed, emergent, and embedded in physiology is changing how we think not only about plants, but about intelligence itself. It suggests that intelligence may not be a property of brains alone, but a spectrum of processes by which living systems respond to complexity. And in that light, the behaviors of plants, once dismissed as passive, automatic, or purely genetic, take on a new significance. They are shaped by history, tuned by feedback, influenced by neighbors, and in many cases, they exhibit the same hallmarks we used to define cognition in animals: memory, learning, decision, and adaptability. Of course, these processes unfold on different time scales. A plant does not react with the speed of a fly or the cunning of a primate. Its decisions are slow, rooted in the tempo of the seasons and the cycles of sun and rain, but they are still decisions, and slowness is not the same as simplicity. One of the most striking implications of this research is how it reframes the concept of problem solving. In traditional cognitive science, solving a problem requires awareness of a goal, obstacles to that goal, and a pathway to overcome them. But in plants, We're beginning to see versions of this too, stripped of awareness peas, but not of strategy. Consider climbing plants that must locate a support structure in order to ascend. Without one, they risk being shaded out and starved of light. So, how do they find it? Some species like peat plants and morning glories engage in a behavior called circulation, a slow spiraling movement of their stems as they grow. This isn't random. The trajectory is often adjusted in response to nearby surfaces, optimizing the chance of contact. If the plant detects a nearby pole or branch, it will bias its growth in that direction. And once contact is made, its tendrils coil on the support to begin climbing. But the fascinating part is what happens before contact. In some experiments, climbing plants appear to aim their growth more efficiently when a support is nearby, as if sensing its presence before touching it. Subtle gradients in light, humidity, or volatile compounds may act as cues, and once a support is located, the coiling motion tightens. Feedback-driven refinement that allows the plant to cling more securely. Some researchers have even proposed that this kind of behavior meets the minimal criteria for tool use, not in the sense of manufacturing an object, but in identifying and exploiting a feature of the air environment to achieve a goal. The support structure becomes a tool for reaching sunlight, and the plant modifies its own form to make use of it. This leads to deeper questions about perception itself. How does a plant know there is a pole nearby? It lacks eyes, it lacks ears, and yet, through gradients of light shifts in airflow or changes in chemical diffusion, it assembles a map, crude but effective, of what surrounds it. That's not passive sensing, that's environmental modeling. And it goes even further. Certain carnivorous plants like the Venus flytrap or the bladderwort must distinguish between random environmental disturbances and the movement of prey. A Venus flytrap will not close unless to separate hairs are touched within a brief window of time. This mechanism reduces the chance of wasting energy on raindrops or falling leaves. It's a kind of logical gate. If A and B occur within X seconds, then close. That's not just detection, it's conditional processing, a form of temporal reasoning embedded in the tissue of a leaf. And it's not limited to the Venus flytrap. Take the aquatic bladderwort, Utricularia. This tiny carnivorous plant sets molecular traps in the water, bladder-like structures that remain under negative pressure, sealed with a flexible door. When small, aquatic organisms brush against trigger hairs near the opening, the door swings open and the prey is sucked inside in less than a millisecond. But here's the catch. The plant doesn't trigger this mechanism for every movement. Like the Venus flytrap, it requires specific conditions to be met, a calibrated combination of mechanical and temporal inputs. And once triggered, the trap resets only after internal pressure is restored, which takes energy. This system is energy efficient, highly selective, and astonishingly fast, all from a plant with no neurons, no muscles, and no awareness in any conventional sense. So where do we draw the line? If a system can detect stimuli, distinguish between types, hold information over time, and act only when a fixed set of conditions is met, is that not a form of cognition? Even if it's built from water pressure and cell walls rather than electricity and synapses. Even more striking are plants that modify their behavior in response to social context, changing how they grow or reproduce depending on who's nearby. Some species delay flowering if closely related individuals are present, reducing competition for pollinators. Others increase their defensive output if surrounded by strangers, suggesting a kind of social discrimination. It's a world of quiet calculations, choices made without yet still guided by information, thresholds, and goals. In recent years, experiments have begun probing just how sophisticated these calculations can be. Take Bacchua trifoliolata, a rare vine native to Chile. This plant does something remarkable. It changes the shape, size, and color of its leaves to mimic those of the plant it's climbing. If the host has small round leaves, Bouquilla grows small round leaves. If the host's leaves are jagged or lobed, Bria follows suit. What's astonishing is that Bouquilla doesn't just mimic one host species, it can adjust its morphology across a wide variety of neighbors, even switching leaf shape if it moves from one host to another. And it does this without direct contact. In some experiments, vines that weren't physically touching the host still altered their leaves to match, suggesting the presence of airborne cues, possibly chemical signals, or even light pattern recognition. This ability to assess another plant's form and then modify one's own to match is difficult to categorize. It isn't a reflex. It's context-dependent, dynamic, and involves multiple sensory inputs. In other words, it looks a lot like perception. Even more intriguingly, mimicry in Bouquilla appears to be adaptive. By blending in with its host, the vine may avoid herbivores that overlook it as just another part of the background. It's camouflage, not in the animal sense with movement and hiding, but in a botanical one, identity masking through morphological plasticity. What's even more provocative is that this mimicry doesn't seem hard-coded. As not a fixed trait turned on by one environmental cue. It's fluid. Learn it, a living plant altering its body plan based on who it's near and what they look like. Some researchers have speculated that Bouquilla's mimicry may rely on a kind of visual perception, or at least the detection of light patterns that differ depending on the structure of nearby leaves. If true, it would mean, and that some plants are capable not only of detecting light intensity and direction, which is well known, but also of interpreting the spatial characteristics of the light environment in ways that, quote, approximate vision. Vision in its broadest sense is the detection of spatial patterns of light and dark. It doesn't necessarily require eyes. If a plant can sense the shadows, reflectance, and geometry of a neighboring plant's leaves, and then reshape its own tissues to match, then it is in a very real way perceiving form, not through a nervous system, but through responsive cells distributed across its surface. This isn't an isolated case. Some carnivorous plants, like the Venus flytrap, rely on intricate timing and mechanical feedback to distinguish between random touches and true prey. To trigger a trap closure, the inner hairs of the leaf must be touched twice within about 20 seconds, a safeguard against wasting energy on false alarms like falling debris or raindrops. That timing requirement implies memory. Not long-term memory, but a short-term biochemical record of past events stored in calcium gradients and electrical charge within the leaf. Other plants exhibit similar temporal discrimination. The stinging hairs of Etiquidea, the common nettle, don't fire off their chemical defenses unless certain thresholds are met. It's in just that the plant reacts, it waits, weighs, and then acts based on cumulative cues. This kind of behavior parallels the way neurons input before firing, except here, the logic is happening in vascular tissue and epidermal cells, not sepses. Together, these examples suggest that many plants don't just register the world, they pass it. They don't just grow toward opportunity or away from danger. They assess, compare, and in some cases adapt in highly specific ways based on subtle multimodal information about their surroundings. Even with all the data we've explored so far, many scientists remain cautious. After all, if we're going to claim that plants exhibit something like cognition, the burden of proof is high. That's why the frontier of plant intelligence research has shifted toward controlled experiments, ones that can isolate cause and effect, measure learning over time, and test for flexibility across changing ages. One example comes from a study on peat plants grown inside Y-shaped mazes. In these setups, researchers paired a gentle breeze with one arm of the maze and then delivered light through that same arm shortly afterward. Over repeated trials, the plants began associating the breeze with incoming light, bending toward it, even when the light was withheld. This kind of Pavlovian response suggests the formation of associative memory, a core feature of adaptive behavior in animals. And when the same experiment was reversed, breeze and light decoupled, the behavior changed accordingly. The plants had not just reacted blindly, they had formed a contingent expectation and updated it. Other researchers tested plant responses to spatial awareness and mechanical simulation. In one study, bean plants were grown with an overhead support beam, something they could eventually reach and wrap around. But before contact was made, researchers gently moved the bean to a new position. Instead of continuing on their previous path, the climbing stems reoriented in the direction of the displaced support, not randomly, but with altered growth arcs that suggested target tracking. It was as though the plant had formed a kind of spatial map, a model not just of where the support had been, but where it had moved. Of course, there are limits to how far these analogies can stretch. What we call learning in plants may not be learning in the same mechanistic sense as in animals. There's no hippocampus, no neurotransmitters storing associative patterns. But behaviorally, the parallels are striking. In some cases, plant responses meet the same criteria used in animal cognition studies: habituation, sensitization, discrimination, generalization, even reversal learning, where a previously learned association undone and replaced with a new one. That last one in particular is often considered a strong benchmark for cognitive flexibility. And there are plants under carefully designed conditions that appear to pass it. Part of what makes this research so challenging is that the signals in plants move on different time scales and through different mediums than we're used to. Animal behavior unfolds in seconds. Plant behavior may take hours. Measuring change requires patience, precision, and the ability to distinguish between growth patterns that are adaptive and those that are merely mechanical. That's why modern studies often rely on time-lapse imaging, gene expression markers, and custom-built environments to track behavior with fine resolution. These tools have revealed micro-adjustments in leaf angle, root patterning, and hormone release that would have been invisible just decades ago. And what's emerging from these studies is a new kind of scientific language, one that tries to describe cognitive phenomena without anthropomorphizing them. Researchers speak of plasticity, information processing, non-neural computation, and distributed sensory integration. These terms may sound abstract, but they represent a deliberate attempt to define plant behavior on its own terms, not by comparing it to what animals do, but by understanding what it is: a unique biochemically rooted form of responsiveness that stretches the boundaries of how we define intelligence. Some of the most compelling experiments come from studies on route navigation. In one setup, researchers created a complex obstacle course underground, a matrix of artificial soil, tunnels, and nutrient pockets, and then planted seedlings at the edge. Over time, the roots didn't just grow blindly, they explored. They probed, paused, retracted, and drew. In some trials, roots even preferred paths that led to nutrient-rich zones, avoiding dead ends with low reward. Their growth wasn't linear, it was contingent, exploratory, as if each root tip were a sensory organ and decision-maker rolled into one. This idea that roots exhibit intelligent foraging is supported by their extraordinary sensitivity. The very tip of a growing root is packed with receptors. It can detect gravity, moisture, pressure, chemical gradients, and even the presence of nearby organisms. When the path ahead is blocked, the root doesn't just stop, it bends, it tries again, and if it finds a more promising direction, it commits. This flexible behavior emerges from a decentralized coordination of cellular signals, calcium waves, toxin gradients, membrane potentials, all interacting without a central control system. One of the most fascinating proposals to emerge from this work is the concept of the root brain. Not a brain in the literal sense. There are no neurons here, but a region at the tip of the root where sensory input is integrated, movement is directed, and responses are initiated. Charles Darwin himself once speculated on this idea in The Power of Movement in Plants, writing that the root apex acts like the brain of the lower animals. Neurons. This root brain hypothesis has led to a resurgence of interest in roots, particularly the transition zone, a narrow region between the meristem and elongation zones. Here, cells are especially active in electrical signaling, showing spikes in ion flux and membrane potential reminiscent of neural activity. Some researchers argue that this zone could function as a kind of command center, not centralized, but sufficiently integrative to coordinate decisions about growth direction, nutrient prioritization, and even avoidance behavior. When this region is damaged, the plant's exploratory behavior becomes erratic, as though its sense of direction has been disrupted. But what's most striking isn't just the complexity of these responses, it's their plasticity. In lab conditions, root behavior varies not just between species, but between individuals. Two genetically identical seedlings placed in identical environments may still choose different paths. That variability isn't noise. It suggests a kind of stochastic strategy, a built-in flexibility that increases the odds of success in unpredictable environments. In ecology, this is called bet hedging, distributing risk across different strategies to improve survival over time. That plants seem to do this with no brain, no awareness, and no control over where their seeds land is a marvel of evolutionary engineering. In fact, this idea of probabilistic strategy appears across the plant kingdom. In seed germination, for example, many species will sprout at different rates even under the same conditions. Some seeds delay, some leap ahead. It's not a mistake, it's insurance. If conditions turn bad, a late frost, a sudden drought, at least some offspring may have timed it right. And remarkably, this timing is often heritable. The tendency to germinate early or late can be passed down, fine-tuned by generations of selection. The plant is in effect encoding a strategy, one that balances risk and reward without a single conscious thought. This capacity for strategic variation both within an individual and across generations speaks to something deeper than mere reaction. It suggests a framework for adaptive behavior, a way of handling uncertainty that is neither rigid nor entirely random. And this flexibility extends not just to growth and timing, but to form. Some plants exhibit a kind of morphological plasticity, altering leaf shape, stem thickness, or branching structure depending on light, wind, crowding, or even the presence of herbivores. In some cases, a plant growing in windier conditions will produce thicker stems and shorter internodes, mechanically optimizing its architecture for survival. It's not a preset plan, it's a conditional blueprint. We see this in climbing plants too. When a tendril encounters a surface, he doesn't just wrap blindly. It tests, explores, and adjusts tension depending on what it finds. Some species can even distinguish between types of support, smooth versus rough, rigid versus flexible, and alter their grip accordingly. This fine-tuned mechanical feedback modulated in real time is achieved through specialized cells that respond to pressure and touch. These are not nerves, but they serve a similar purpose, transducing external input into specific local behavior, and in some cases, that behavior can ripple through the whole plant, altering its entire mode of growth. One of the most dramatic examples comes from parasitic plants like doders. When a dodder seedling germinates, it swings in slow arcs through the air, a behavior known as circummutation, searching for a host. But this movement isn't random. Studies have shown that dodders can detect airborne chemical cues from nearby plants and will bend preferentially toward preferred hosts. Once contact is made, it evaluates the quality of the connection. If the host is nutrient poor or heavily defended, the daughter may detach and try again elsewhere. This is a plant that not only searches but chooses, and the sophistication doesn't end at host detection. Some studies have shown that daughters can exhibit differential gene expression depending on the identity of its host, tailoring its parasitic strategy to match the defenses or nutritional content of the plant it's feeding on. This is a form of conditional exploitation. A parasitic plant isn't just passively leaching, it's sensing, evaluating, and adjusting, and it does so without eyes, ears, or a brain. Just a toolkit of chemical perception, mechanical feedback, and genetic plasticity working in concert to solve a very specific biological challenge: how to survive on someone else's body. This behavior isn't limited to parasites. Even in non-parasitic plants, researchers have uncovered startling forms of spatial awareness. Some climbing species appear capable of what's called anticipatory reaching, growing toward nearby supports before contact is made, adjusting trajectory based on sensed proximity and orientation. In a rise of experiments with pea plants, scientists placed vertical poles within range of the plant's exploratory tendrils. The peas began to shift their growth direction toward the poles even before touching them, and when the poles were moved, the plants reoriented, not instantly but deliberately, as if recalibrating their model of the space around them. This kind of spatial mobility is especially striking because it unfolds so slowly. We don't usually think of growth as behavior, but if behavior is defined as an active context-dependent change in state, then growth is behavior. And when that growth is responsive to dynamic surroundings, when it bends, halts, accelerates, or retreats based on new information, it begins to resemble a kind of embodied problem-solving. He thought perhaps, but a structured response to structure, a way of matching internal processes to external form. In this view, every shoot and root becomes a slow-motion hypothesis. What if I grow this way? What happens if I try that? And it isn't only external structures that plants respond to. They also seem to assess and optimize their own form as they grow. Consider leaf arrangement, the pattern of leaves along a stem or branch. Many species exhibit what's known as phyllotaxis, a precise mathematical spacing that maximizes light capture while minimizing self-shading. These arrangements often follow Fibonacci spirals, chemical gradients, and internal hormonal signals, all adjusting dynamically as the plant develops. Even root architecture, long assumed to be governed by simple tropisms like gravity and moisture, now appears to involve far more complex regulation. Roots just follow nutrients blindly. They branch, bifurcate, and reorient based on prior contact, competitive pressure, and internal nutrient needs. When multiple roots from the same plant approach the same patch of soil, they often avoid overlap, maximizing territory. But when roots from a neighboring plant are encountered, the strategy may shift, sometimes avoiding times outcome competing, depending on species, kinship, and context. The root system, invisible to us, is constantly negotiating an unseen map, one informed by both memory and measurement. Some experiments have even explored the possibility that roots exhibit a form of tactile discrimination. When grown in the presence of differently textured materials, sand, gravel, clay, roots will often prioritize one over another, not purely based on nutrient content, but on mechanical feedback. They can feel their way through the soil, selecting pathways that balance stability, permeability, and ascesius. And in split root setups where a plant's roots are divided into separate compartments with different conditions, scientists have observed coordinated allocation strategies. One half of the root cyst and might explore a nutrient trick zone, while the other holds back. Then if the environment shifts, the strategy can reverse. It's a whole plant decision emerging from localized sensing. D. Distributed intelligence playing out in the dark. We also see this adaptability in how plants regulate their internal chemical economies. Secondary metabolites, the vast array of compounds produced beyond the essentials of growth and reproduction, are not generated haphazardly. These include alkaloids, terpenes, phenolics, and other substances with roles in defense, attraction, signaling, and stress response. Plants modulate the production of these chemicals based on ongoing environmental conditions, often with remarkable specificity. A tomato plant attacked by one type of caterpillar may ramp up one set of alkaloids, while a different insect triggers a completely distinct profile. This tailored biochemistry reflects a kind of diagnostic capability, an ability to not just detect damage, but classify it and respond with appropriate molecular tools. Moreover, these chemical decisions are often cost-balanced. Producing defensive compounds takes energy, and that energy could otherwise suffer growth, reproduction, or root expansion. So, the plant must choose. Should it invest now in protection or wait? Should it direct resources toward one leaf or another? These are not conscious choices, of course, but they are functional analogies to resource budgeting, and they change based on history, context, and predicted need. A plant that's been attacked before may run its chemistry, producing compounds more rapidly next time, even if the immediate threat has passed. That means plants not only measure current danger, they remember the past and prepare for the future. And this biochemical foresight can be astonishingly nuanced. In some species, plants can detect not just herbivore presence, but herbivore saliva, distinguishing between mechanical damage, insect feeding. Others can differentiate between touch caused by raindrops and touch caused by climbing vines or insect footsteps. In every case, the response is specific, not generalized reactivity, but tailored modulation. That level of discernment demands an internal system capable of encoding and comparing a distributed network that, while not conscious, functions with rules and logic. It may not think in a human sense, but it perceives with structure. This capacity for rule-based response has inspired some researchers to borrow terms from systems theory and cyber ethics to describe plant behavior not merely in biological terms, but as a form of distributed computation. In this view, the plant is a dynamic information processor, constantly updating its internal state based on a wide array of inputs, adjusting behavior through chemical feedback loops, epigenetic modulation, and intercellular signaling. It doesn't decide like a brain does, but it resolves uncertainty by integrating information. And that fundamentally is computation. One of the most evocative examples of this lies in plant circadian rhythms. Nearly all plants possess internal biological clocks, molecular systems that track the passage of time independent of light exposure. These clocks allow plants to anticipate sunrise and sunset, to adjust photosynthesis accordingly, and to time flowering, leaf movement, or chemical synthesis to match the day's rhythms. These are not reactions to light. They are forecasts. Even in total darkness, plants continue to modulate their internal processes on a roughly 24-hour cycle guided by molecular oscillators composed of transcription factors, feedback loops, and power genetic circuitry. Circadian systems in plants are robust, flexible, and capable of being entrained, synchronized by environmental cues like temperature and light. But they are also self-sustaining, capable of free-running cycles that persist in isolation. That's an essential feature of a true internal clock. It doesn't just respond to the world. It marks time on its own, adjusting its rhythm only when external signals demand it. The ability to entrain, predict, and correct timing deviations is a sophisticated form of self-regulation, one that borders on what cognitive scientists might call temporal modeling. In recent years, scientists have begun asking how deeply this Temporal modeling shapes a plant's overall behavior. If a plant can anticipate dawn, could it also anticipate seasonal changes or the return of pollen, atters, and if so, what form does that expectation take? Some species appear to use photoperiod, the relative lengths of day and night, not only to time flowering, but to control the expression of genes related to reproduction, growth, and defense. The change in daylight acts not as a trigger but as a cue, something interpreted by the plant's internal model of time. This idea that plants construct models of time, space, and contingency is still controversial, but it fits with a growing body of evidence suggesting that plants are not just passive filters of the environment, they are active, the interpreters, and like any interpreter, they must carry something inside themselves that reflects the outside world, a kind of internal mirror shaped by memory, encoded in chemistry, distributed across tissues. It's not a metaphor, it's biochemistry with representational properties. Some researchers argue that this ability to model the environment, to forecast, to integrate, to prioritize, is the core of cognition itself. Not awareness, not sentience, not emotion, but computation. A biological system, even one without a brain, may still be intelligent if it can gather information, evaluate trade-offs, and adjust its behavior in adaptive ways. And by that standard, plants, slow, silent, rooted, may be among the most underestimated intelligences on Earth. But if we accept that plants compute, that they model, predict, and act on information, then a new question arises: can these systems be simulated? And if so, what might we learn? By translating the logic of a plant into the logic of a machine in recent years, researchers in bio-inspired robotics and artificial intelligence have started turning to plants not just as subjects of study, but as models for design. Their decentralized decision, their adaptive thresholds, their integration of slow but reliable signals. These are not just biological quirks, they're strategies, and they may offer powerful templates for building more robust, resilient forms of intelligence. One group of researchers inspired by climbing plants developed robotic tendrils that sense and respond to touch. These soft robots don't follow pre-programmed path. Instead, they adjust growth like extensions in response to environmental cues, curling toward supports, avoiding obstacles, and optimizing grip with minimal energy. The algorithms governing these behaviors borrow directly from plant physiology, local sensing, distributed processing, and continuous feedback between action and environment. In essence, they grow rather than move. Another team created systems that mimic root growth. These robotic roots search for nutrients by spreading into artificial soil, not randomly, but according to simulated gradients of chemical information. The robot uses a network of simple processes to decide which branch to grow next based on local feedback. There's no central controller, no CPU dictating movement. The intelligence is emergent, distributed across the system, just like in plants. And the result is a machine that doesn't solve problems the way animals do, but the way a root might. These designs aren't just clever novelties. They highlight something profound: that the principles governing plant behavior, slowness, decentralization, adaptivity, and resource efficiency may be just as valuable in artificial systems as they are in living ones. In fields like swarm robotics, disaster response, or deep space exploration, where communication isn't always possible and autonomy is essential, plant-like strategies could offer a quiet kind of robustness, one that doesn't rely on split-second reaction, but on gradual cumulative sensing, on decisions made not in haste, but in harmony with context. Some researchers are even looking into plant-based computation. Instead of using silicon circuits to process information, they are exploring how real plants or plant tissues might serve as computational substrates. In one study, scientists used lettuce seedlings as biological logic gates, exploiting their natural electric properties. By applying weak voltages and measuring outputs, they demonstrated simple forms of logic operations and or not. It's rudimentary, of course, but it suggests that even living matter without neurons can process input, produce defined rule-based output. Why does this matter? Because it forces us to expand what we mean by intelligence. For most of human history, we equated thinking with speed, with complexity, with the sparkle of electricity through brain tissue. But plants invite us to consider a different model, one that's slow, modular, and patient, one that encodes memory not in neurons, but in growth patterns and epigenetic shifts, and one that may prove not only biologically insightful, but technologically useful. Some of the most exciting frontiers in plant science today aren't just about what plants can already do, but what they might teach us, because, as strange as it sounds, plant behavior is beginning to inform the design of artificial intelligence. Traditional AI systems are modeled after animal brains, networks of nodes simulating neurons, learning from data through feedback and reinforcement. But that's only a way to process information. Plants offer a radically different blueprint. They operate without neurons, without centralized control, and yet still manage to sense, decide, coordinate, and remember, all within a distributed, decentralized architecture. This model, distributed sensing with local decision, has started to influence certain areas of AI, especially in fields like arm robotics and edge computing. Engineers are asking, what if we didn't need a central processor to manage a system? What if each node, each robot, each sensor could behave more like a plant cell, acting independently but still contributing to the whole? This decentralized model offers resilience. If a plant loses a leaf, it doesn't shut down. If a root is damaged, both RS can compensate. Similarly, a system built on plant-inspired architecture might be more fault-tolerant, able to adapt to changing environments, root around damaged components, and continue functioning even under doubly stress. Some researchers are even designing plant-like robots, soft-growing machines that change shape in response to their surroundings. These robots don't move like animals. They grow like vines, expanding and anchoring themselves as they explore. Their behavior is governed not by central commands, but by local conditions like moisture, obstacles. It's a new paradigm for movement and adaptation, one rooted in growth, not locomotion. And beyond robotics, there's growing interest in how plants manage complexity. A single tree manages millions of leaves, each responding to light, temperature, and water. Yet, the tree as a whole maintains balance. That kind of hierarchical coordination, from individual unit to collective function, could inform how we build scalable AI systems that are both robust and adaptive. There's also a philosophical dimension to all of this. As artificial intelligence becomes increasingly powerful, we're faced with a foundational question: what counts as intelligence? For decades, our benchmarks were modeled on human cognition, chess mastery, language fluency, and logical deduction. But plants operate outside these frameworks, not because they're inferior, but because their context is different. Their intelligence, if we call it that, is slow, embodied, distributed, and deeply entwined with their environment. And in some ways, this plant-like intelligence may be more relevant to our future than we think. As we deploy AI into physical systems, autonomous vehicles, adaptive architecture, environmental monitoring, the goal isn't always to simulate human minds. It's to build systems that thrive under constraint, that sense without seeing, that react without moving, that adapt, persist, and optimize, even when centralized control is impossible. This has sparked a growing interest in so-called plant-inspired computing, an emerging field where researchers draw on biological strategies used by plants to develop novel algorithms and machine intelligence architectures. For example, Distributed sensing and control, a hallmark of plant behavior. Applications in robotics and swarm systems, where no single node governs the whole but intelligence emerges from the sundry interactions of many simple parts. In plants, this allows decentralized decision. Root tips explore independently but share information chemically. In robots, it means swarms that can search disaster zones or survey ecosystems without a leader. Similarly, researchers are investigating how plants encode memory and epigenetic patterns, and how those patterns can inform new models for long-term learning in machines. Unlike traditional memory storage, which is centralized and explicit, plant star memory is adaptive, resilient, and embedded in structure itself. It's not just data, it's behavior modified by experience with no need for digital storage or central oversight. These aren't just metaphors, they're working models. In one line of research, scientists have used plant root growth algorithms to solve optimization problems, like finding the sure test path through a maze, not by calculating every option, but by exploring a field of possibilities in parallel and reinforcing paths that prove effective. It's a kind of trial and error learning that mimics evolution, not logic, and it works. And the parallels don't stop at behavior. Some researchers are taking a step further, exploring whether entirely new forms of artificial intelligence may it be built using plant materials themselves. This is the idea behind plant-based biohybrid systems. These are experimental technologies where living plants are integrated with electronic components to create sensors, processors, or communication networks that blend biological adaptability with machine precision. For instance, because plants naturally respond to humidity, detach, and pollutants, their tissues can be harnessed as environmental sensors, detecting changes with a sensitivity that rivals or surpasses human-made devices. One project, for example, used a plant's changing electrical resistance to detect airborne toxins. When exposed to certain chemicals, the plant's physiology altered subtly but measurably. Electrodes attached to the leaves converted these changes into data, turning the plant into a kind of living circuit. No batteries, no artificial inputs, just biology doing what it already does with a little help from technology. This convergence of plant biology and machine learning has begun to shift how we think about intelligence itself. If cognition doesn't require a brain, if information can be processed through slow chemical decentralized means, then what else might qualify as a mind? Some theorists have proposed a framework known as minimal cognition, the idea that cognition exists on a spectrum, and that even very simple systems can exhibit the building blocks of intelligent behavior. Under this view, the threshold for being considered a cognitive system isn't a brain or consciousness or even neurons. It's the ability to acquire, store, process, and respond to information in ways that enhance survival or efficiency. By that definition, a plant with its ability to sense, to integrate, to add just behavior based on past experience, and even to signal others might qualify as a minimally cognitive agent. It wouldn't know in the way humans know, but it would participate in something adjacent, a kind of distributed awareness rooted in the body, shaped by context and guided by feedback. This raises a fascinating possibility. If intelligence can emerge without neurons, if memory can exist without a mind, then perhaps we've been looking at cognition through too narrow a lens. We've assumed that thought must resemble our own, that awareness must be fast, mobile, centralized, and internal, but nature may be offering us a much broader definition, one where thought is not a location but a process, not a spark but a slow, persistent unfolding. This broader view doesn't just expand the scope of what counts as cognition. It invites us to rethink our relationship with other forms of life entirely. Plants, from this perspective, are not passive scenery. They are active participants in their environment, constantly solving problems, communicating, and making decisions just on a timeline, and in a language we've only recently begun to decipher. It also challenges the way we draw boundaries between living systems and artificial ones. As researchers develop new forms of synthetic biology and plant-inspired robotics, the behaviors of plants, slow sensing, distributed control, adaptive response, are becoming models for how to build more resilient, flexible, and sustainable machines. In some cases, engineers are designing soft robots that mimic root growth or circuits that process information chemically rather than electronically, all inspired by how plants manage life without movement. And in the realm of artificial intelligence, plant biology is raising new questions about how intelligence can be embodied. Can a system without centralized processing still be considered smart? Can intelligence emerge from networks that grow rather than compute? These questions don't just apply to forests or gardens. They apply to the future of our own technologies. These questions are already shaping new fields of inquiry. In bio-inspired computing, for example, researchers are beginning to design information systems that process data more like plants do, using parallel distributed networks that respond to environmental context in real time. Some systems even incorporate living components like slime molds or engineered root-like structures to solve problems in ways that are adaptive rather than algorithmic. The goal isn't to replicate human intelligence. It's to explore alternative models, forms of cognition that arise not from brains or logic, but from embodiment, responsiveness, and evolution. In this sense, plants are not just subjects of study. They are collaborators in a broader reimagining of intelligence itself. Philosophers of mind have taken notice. The rise of plant cognition studies has prompted renewed interest in what it means to be a thinking thing. If intelligence doesn't require a brain, if learning can occur without consciousness, then our definitions need to change. Thinkers now argue for a more inclusive framework, one that sees cognition not as a binary you have it or you don't, but as a spectrum or even a multidimensional space with different kinds of minds occupying different regions. Even in artificial systems, this distributed intelligence is starting to inspire new ways of thinking. Computer scientists and engineers studying plant biology have begun borrowing ideas from this decentralized approach to problem solving. Instead of building centralized control systems like traditional neural networks, they explore how behavior might emerge from thousands of simple communicating units, each one processing a little crass information and passing signals onward. These approaches, sometimes called plant-inspired computation, are part of a growing effort to rethink artificial intelligence from the ground up. Rather than copying the brain with its rigid hierarchies and rapid-fire synapses, what if we designed machines that think more like forests, systems that grow, adapt, and respond contextually, not by speed but by depth, not by logic alone, but by experience accumulated across a vast web? And in a surprising twist, some of the techniques developed to model plant intelligence are now feeding back into biology itself. Tools trained on plant imaging data, like time-lapse root movement or cellular growth patterns, are helping researchers uncover previously unseen rhythms in plant development, hidden pulses, cycles of chemical signaling, patterns of behavior that no human observer would have had the patience or perspective to detect. It's a quiet irony. Machines built to mimic us, now helping us decode organisms utterly unlike ourselves. And in doing so, perhaps they also helping us redefine what intelligence truly means. For centuries, we've drawn a hard line between thinkers and non-thinkers, animals and plants, mind and matter. But as we uncover more about how plants behave, adapt, and respond, not blindly, but selectively, even creatively, those lines begin to blur. Some researchers now argue that we should think less in terms of intelligence as a singular property and more in terms of cognitive strategies, A brain is one strategy. A network of chemical and electrical signaling cells is another. Both solve problems. Both allow organisms to thrive in complex dynamic environments. But they do so through different architectures tuned to different lives. And in that sense, the plant kingdom may be offering us a profound lesson. And humility, intelligence, it turns out, doesn't require eyes or muscles or even motion. It doesn't require a brain at all. It can be slow, it can be silent. It can live in roots and leaves and branching mycelia and shifting hormone gradients woven into the fabric of living systems we've only just begun to understand. As we settle into the quiet of the evening, we can let these thoughts drift softly through the mind. The world of plants, silent, slow, and seemingly still, holds mysteries that stretch beyond what we once imagined. Their lives unfold in rhythms that are gentler than ours, but no less rich. It's okay if your eyes grow heavy now, or if your thoughts begin to wander away. The science will be here patiently waiting, ready to greet you when you return. Imagine the slow dance of roots and leaves, the whispered exchanges beneath the soil, a subtle unfolding intelligence encoded in every cell. It's a reminder that life's depths are oft and quiet and unseen. And so as your breath eases and your mind softens, know that this story of plants, of intelligence, of life itself, is never truly finished. It continues quietly, growing patiently, waiting beneath the stars. And so under the quiet stars, the story continues. I hope you sleep well, dream softly, and wake up tomorrow feeling refreshed and ready for a new day. Good night.
Thank you.